This is a quick little lecture on Fields of Fire, and then we should be all set. Any questions before we go in? Going once?
No, looking forward to it.
Going twice? Alright. So, Odin's Orphan, by the way, welcome, sir. I have yet to meet you, but I would like to officially welcome you. So...
Greetings!
So, essentially, guys, we're going to do...
I'll be wanting Odin's.
Essentially, guys, what we're doing is pretty simple. We're going to do the usual meet in the middle, and going to do a few demonstrations and some discussion, and then open it up for questions and comments, and then we will be moving on to Fun Friday, because really, we actually don't even have enough people on to do any of the big team stuff. So this will still work, though. This is still going to be the other topic I want to talk about anyway, so it's not that bad. I wish I could get rid of the timer. I wish that was a thing for training. Get rid of that, the beginning timer. Right to the center, Lieutenant. Our usual little meeting spot. Remember, guys, no firing, no nothing. We're just discussing for a little bit. Now, this topic that I'm talking about via Fields of Fire, this is something that is kind of at the more advanced level, something that you really automatically do. Now, there's kind of several situations where some situations where you use it, and some situations where you don't. So, for instance, Robbie, stay right there. I'm going to be using you as an example for a second. Actually, I'm going to want Lieutenant, you're going to pull up right next to me on the right. But something to keep... What?
I said just give me a sec.
Yeah, I know, you're
He's
slow.
on his way.
We'll get here eventually. But, alright, so let's get back into the topic. So... essentially establishing Fields of Fire. Now, what does that exactly mean? That means that essentially you have different tanks on your team looking in different directions already. So, for instance, myself, Lieutenant, and Robbie are on a team. And we see that, we pushed up to here, we don't know where the enemies are, but we know that, pretend that we're all from the North team, we know the enemies are from down there. So, typically, what would end up happening is all of us, if we weren't focusing on Fields of Fire, would all look directly at their base. However, in some situations, you don't really know where the enemies are. They could be over on the fields to the right. They could be on top on the left. This is where you establish something called Fields of Fire. Now, that's the idea. If you look at your map, that means taking a tank and telling them exactly which section they should be looking at. Kind of like it's an early warning system so they can keep their attention on it so they understand what's happening. So, for instance, in this situation, Robbie, you would probably be looking to the left because that's easy for you to look at. Lieutenant would be looking to the right. Now, typically what happens is it's actually pretty simple. If you're only running 3 tanks, generally it's 90 degree if you're running horizontal, meaning he's looking 90 degrees to the left, Lieutenant's looking 90 degrees to the right. However, the more tanks you have, the smaller that angle. Meaning, Robbie and Lieutenant, can you actually go to 45 degrees? Right about there? Yep. So essentially, if we had more tanks, like for instance, if New York City Fan and Jones were there, then they would actually be looking roughly more like 80 degrees or even 90 degrees to the sides. The point being is that if you don't know where the enemy is, you are going to have a gun that's close enough to put a snapshot on them, to lay down that fire. Now, this is a tactic that works really well. For instance, remember we're doing the Wolfpack training. Now, when you don't know where the enemy is, you're going to want to have a gun pointed at them somehow. And doing something like this is actually very effective. Now, this is also something that's actually very effective when going through city streets. Now, for instance, a lot of those times you don't see them till either you come around the corner or you proxy spot them. And you generally don't have that much time to maneuver and or aim your gun. So what I usually recommend is if you're in groups like this, now let's go to we're in a horizontal formation. Could we go to a vertical formation? Meaning I want you guys to follow in a line behind me. So it'll be myself, then Lieutenant, then Robbie. Actually, yeah, or whichever way it'll be easier for you guys. Yep, you guys work it out in the back however you guys want to. Yep, exactly. Now, granted, I'm going to pull forward a little bit and keep the spacing. There, right about there. So, no, Robbie, pull forward a little bit, about 5 meters. There you go, stop. So, essentially, pretend that, for instance, we are going through an urban area, kind of a city street. So, essentially, the idea that generally, you can have kind of one of two different methods. Now, I usually kind of subscribe to the method that you really want most everybody focusing their firepower in the same area. So, typically, how it would go is if Lieutenant sees that I'm pointing my gun straight ahead in case if there's an enemy straight ahead, Now, Lieutenant would probably point his gun 30 or 40 degrees to either side, or even 20 if that's acceptable. So, Lieutenant, point yours to the right for the sake of it. That means, okay, Robbie, you see that. You point your gun to the left, and New York City would point to the right. And actually what would happen typically in this situation is you would even have the last person, now granted Jones, you're in the SU, so you don't really have a turret, but typically you'd have someone that, if you think the enemy might be coming up behind you, they'd be rotating their turret and looking around the back. The whole idea for establishing these fields of fire, yet again, I know I'm reiterating it a lot, but it's pretty simple. Make sure you have a gun on target. And this is also something that, with everybody that's looking in their sector, like if I told Lieutenant, alright, you're responsible from straight ahead to 45 degrees, and I would say affirmative, and he would probably type in chat and just give the quick affirmative, and then I'd probably tell the same for Robbie, a New York City fan. Now this is for if I'm calling. Now if you guys are in a platoon, this is something you guys might want to do automatically, really. You might want to look at the situation and say, oh, we don't know where the enemy is, and they could come at us from anywhere. Now, the whole idea is, it kind of, I see this happen in platoons a lot, where everybody's looking the same direction, and all of a sudden, enemy comes to the right, and what happens? I turn my turret to the right, and Lieutenant turns to the right, and then he can't shoot, well, in this case, he could shoot over me. That's actually pretty perfect. But, wow, I gotta remember that. But, the point being, a lot of times, we'll be blocking each other, and then we'll have to start shifting around, and then we're bumping into each other. This is the whole idea to establish that people can already look a certain direction and at least get a guaranteed shot or two off. So, the situations I will say when not to use that is when you know exactly where the enemy is. Like, for instance, I know for a fact Trina Mafia is right there, and he's part of the enemy team, or at least for me. And if I'm here to destroy his team and he's right there, typically there's no need for me to really be doing the fields of fire still. So the point being, your targets that you're trying to kill obviously take priority over the fields of fire, but if you don't see anything and you have no idea, that's when to use it. So I would say that the more people that you use, your degrees that you're responsible for get smaller. Meaning, if we took everybody here and actually formed like a group, we'd really only have to cover 90 degrees, but everybody would be slightly different. So they'd probably be 8 or 10 different directions everybody would be looking in. But if you guys look at like where my turret, like I'm turning and stopping, imagine every different person looking that direction. Someone looks there, someone looks there, 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 there. And in a wolf pack, that's kind of something you want to do. So kind of usually the people that are on the flanks or on the sides or even the rear, they look to the sides the most, and the people that are in front or that don't have as much visibility to the sides kind of look more forward is the point. So any questions, comments, concerns so far?
So doing something like that, you would probably want the slower tank up front instead of a faster tank?
That really depends. That's very actually map dependent, because for instance, if you're on something like Himmelsdorf, surprise is everything, but also armor matters, so it kind of depends on your composition versus the enemy. I would say that typically, if I was to give you an idea where the two situations differ, if we're in a tier 8 game, and I'm with Robbie, well, technically I'm a tier 9, but if we're in a tier 9 game, and I'm the only tier 9, he's a tier 8, I would probably go first because I have more armor, but we're also comparative mobility. But if I was with Lieutenant, because he has so much armor, I would duck behind him on an open map like this. But whereas something like Himmelsdorf, I really promote a lot of those small maps having the mobility because surprise is everything. So if you have slower tanks, they can go in the back if you have a place for your less armored tanks to actually run to. So the point being, if you have fast tanks, if you have your scouts up in front, which you can do, if they can scatter and move somewhere and find cover and get the intel for the heavy tanks to roll in with the mediums, and they're all using their fields of fire, and then a target is called, that's kind of where that target calling comes in, that teeing up, because they take their fields of fire and everybody looks at the target and shoots. So the point being that you can do it either way. It's kind of whatever the situation calls for. But I would say that keep in mind that certain maps, you have to compare your tank compositions and realize that if you put your heavy tanks first, they're probably going to be focused out and vice versa. Whatever tanks you put up front are generally going to be the ones spotted by the enemy first and are probably going to be ones that focused out first. That's why, for instance, out of this group, I'd probably usually put Lieutenant first because he actually has a pretty good chance to bounce shots on the front of his tank, or even if we had a mouse or something like that. But if the enemy tank is all mobile, then I don't mind sending in scouts first or vice versa. You kind of have to read it when you see it. I know that was a long, complicated answer, but I try to give as much information as I can. Sorry, does anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns before I open up the floor to anything? Nobody has any questions?
No, sir.
Alright, so everybody fully understands what I was talking about, and everybody's happy with it?
Yeah.
Alright.
So if you're rolling through a city map
spin.
and you know, in a skirmish battle, you could almost have one tank rolling backwards as bringing up the rear, couldn't you?
Oh yeah, and that's...
Major comment.
Yep.
Ain't no good. Your mic.
Yes, sir.
It's horrible right now. You're a huge.
Yeah, I don't know if you're breaking up or.
Do you have a fan blowing at you right now?
Yeah, I do. Let me go move it.
Yep, I thought so.
Okay.
That'll do it.
Do you have a van?
Hey,
Oh
James.
yeah, I do.
Yeah.
How'd you know?
You make my head spin.
Dork.
Right round, right round. But, alright, so... Ain't no good, you still there?
How's that? Any better?
Oh, that's fantastic.
Very better.
So what was your question?
Okay. So it would be theoretically possible, say, rolling through a city town to have one tank rolling backwards.
If it can
cover the
keep
rear.
up. Yeah, and that's something I have seen done. I will say, on the current meta, it doesn't always work. But for instance, if you have a tank with a very heavy team, and you've put something like an IS-7 in reverse behind, like a bunch of E100s and a mouse, you can do that, and that is something that I've seen used. However, I would say that typically, with some tanks, you might just want to keep rolling forward with your turret just pointing behind you. Because, for instance, a good take for that is an IS-4, because the rear and side armor is so good that if I were to see an enemy tank behind me, I just put it at 45 degrees and my turret's already pointing behind, and generally I'll bounce most shots. So it's kind of tank dependent, but yes, that is a strategy you can use.
Okay.
Alright, so any other questions before I open it up to full discussion? No? Okay. Now this is the part where I just wanted to ask, this is something that I kind of want to do, is the fact that now it's the end of the week and just before we start off Fun Fridays, I wanted to ask you guys any sort of questions, comments about this week's training in general, or do you guys have any questions about next week's training? I just wanted to make sure that if anybody has any questions, I can kind of answer them now, and it'll also be put up on YouTube, so anybody else that asks these questions in a couple days can refer to this for the answer. So, any questions?
Wednesday's training code.
Oh, that is something that totally slipped my mind. Once we're done with this, I'll go generate it. Right after this, that's not a problem.
Alright.
And that's something actually, remember everybody to be signing in on Wot Manager and doing that. It helps us out a ton with keeping everything organized. Any other questions before we end the training room?
Can we kill each other?
Kill each other before we end the
Not
training room?
yet. We will, though. We do the usual send-off. Just a reminder to everybody, Knee-Jerk, we're still doing the clan meeting tomorrow, correct?
Yeah, it's not going to be a detailed one. I mean, there's been some changes this week we should go over. I haven't been keeping my notes up to date. I don't have much to talk about other than some of the changes, and we may have something later on in the week.
Okay.
I just will keep you guys posted as we go. Things are going to be changing. We're going to be putting some things into the fold, so we will probably update you more. It probably won't be implemented tomorrow or anything, but as the week goes on, I'll just tell you as we go, and then we'll have another. We will have the meeting tomorrow, but then next Saturday we'll have another one. But I think
May I
in
interject,
between
please?
then, yes.
From Boomtastic and all them, there was a meeting yesterday. I'll catch y'all up onto that one. But they're having a meeting tomorrow about the final decision. I'll inform y'all what that's all about. Knee-Jerk, I think you already know. But yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So after
I know
this...
about it. It's about Clan Wars.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I have a question.
I have an answer.
good. Okay. Is there a training code for today's training?
Yet
We're
again,
working on it.
that will be posted right after. But I always wait till the end, so.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
alright, and something I do want to remind people is that, make sure that you guys, when you guys got time, make sure you guys can platoon up, get some grinding done. Remember, the focus is on Tier 6 tanks right now, and that's going to be the focus for a while. Tier 6 skirmish tanks. If you guys have any questions about what tanks you guys want and don't want, I have provided a bunch of people with a link to a Google document that lists them all out. However, if they want to talk to me in person, they can. And the last final thing before closing out, I am forgetting, because this is also for all the people listening on YouTube. For all the clan members. Nope. It left my mind, so that'll probably be in the comments section. Because, yeah. So this
Never
is.
mind that one.
Oh, okay. So, without further ado, I will say that if there's no other questions, then this was a quick little training, and everybody will be able to have open fire when it hits 1440. And I'm going to try. Really ain't no good? Really? You're gonna be following me like that?
Go on then.
Dude, I can out DPM the crap out of you.
It's not 1440 yet, by the way. Oh yeah, it is. Sorry.
It passed.
He got behind me.
Wow.
Headshot.
That ammo rack.
That
And
ammo
Robbie's got
racket
it.
burned my retinas out.